My sister humiliated me at dinner. My parents laughed, and wine soaked my uniform. I still feel the exact chill of that red wine soaking through the thin blue fabric of my scrubs the moment Claire's glass tipped in her exaggerated gesture, as if the whole evening had been building toward that single humiliating splash. And I remember standing there in my parents' suburban dining room, the overhead light catching the spreading stain like blood on my chest, while the smell of roasted garlic from Mom's lasagna mixed with the sharp metallic tang of Cabernet, and their laughter rose around me. First Claire's bright tinkling one that always carried just a hint of superiority, then Mom's softer chuckle turning into genuine amusement, and Dad's deep belly roar that shook his shoulders as he slapped the table saying, "Oh honey, you should see your face, it's priceless." Like I was the entertainment, not the daughter who had driven 40 minutes after a double shift at the hospital, where I'd held the hand of a dying patient and charted vitals until my eyes burned, because family dinner was supposed to be the one place I could breathe. But instead, it became the place where everything I had quietly endured for years cracked open in front of me. The uniform I hadn't had time to change out of, still carrying the faint antiseptic scent of work, now ruined and clinging cold and sticky to my skin. My ponytail coming loose, strands sticking to my damp neck as I blinked hard against the sting in my eyes, telling myself not to cry, not here, not while Claire leaned back in her chair, her perfectly manicured nails papping the stem of her now half-empty glass, and said, "Come on, sis, it was an accident, lighten up. You're always so buttoned up in that little nurse outfit, like you're waiting for a medal or something." And Mom nodded, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes with the corner of her napkin, agreeing, "Oh, Claire's right, it'll wash out, don't make a scene, we're just having fun." While Dad reached for the bottle to pour another round, still grinning as if my soaked chest and the way my hands trembled around the napkin I pressed uselessly to the stain were the highlight of his birthday. And inside me, something ancient and heavy shifted. The raw shock of realizing that even in this moment of literal mess, they saw me as the punchline, the reliable one who showed up exhausted and overlooked, while Claire, the golden child with her city apartment and expense account life, got the pass, the forgiveness, the laughter that should have been concern. And I felt the pain bloom hot in my throat, the grief of every birthday I'd spent helping Mom with her garden, or sitting with Dad through his physical therapy sessions, while Claire sent flowers from afar and received the praise for thoughtfulness. And now this, the confrontation that wasn't even a fight, just their casual cruelty exposing how invisible I had become to the people who were supposed to know me best. And I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loud against the tile, the sound cutting through their fading chuckles, as I stood there, wine dripping onto the floor in small dark spots that looked like accusations, and my voice came out quieter than I wanted at first, then steadier. "What the hell is wrong with you? This isn't funny, it's humiliating." But Claire just rolled her eyes, waving her hand like I was overreacting again, and Mom murmured, "Now, sweetheart, it's only wine, we all spill things," while Dad muttered something about kids these days being too sensitive, and the immediate fallout hit me like a wave, the anger and betrayal twisting so tight in my chest that I couldn't breathe properly. I grabbed my keys from the side table, my coat half on, the wet fabric of my uniform pulling at my skin as I walked out the front door into the cool evening drizzle that had started while we ate, the rain mixing with the tears I finally let fall once I was in my car, the engine humming to life and the wipers sweeping back and forth across the windshield, blurring the familiar streetlights of the neighborhood where I had grown up, feeling like the second choice. And I drove without direction at first, circling blocks until the sobs came harder, the kind that shook my shoulders and made my vision swim. Because this wasn't just about spilled wine, it was about the years of quiet dismissal, the way my accomplishments at the hospital, my night classes, my careful budgeting, were met with polite nods, while Claire's every promotion warranted a family toast. And in the rearview mirror, I caught sight of my reflection, the red stain blooming across my chest like a wound that had been waiting to surface. And the guilt flickered too. Maybe I had been too quiet, too willing to smooth things over for the sake of peace. But no, this time the shock settled deep into my bones, a grief so honest it felt almost clarifying, as I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the parking lot empty under the sodium lights, and sat there for long minutes, the car ticking as it cooled, the soaked uniform growing colder against my body, until I forced myself inside, peeling off the ruined scrubs in the bathroom, the fabric landing in the sink with a heavy, wet slap, and staring at my face in the mirror, the mascara smudged, the eyes red-rimmed, wondering how a single dinner could upend the fragile balance I had maintained for so long, the pain still fresh and pulsing, but carrying with it the first faint edge of something else, a resolve not to let it define me forever, even as the texts started buzzing on my phone. Mom's, "Sorry if we upset you, it was just joking," followed by Claire's, "Casual, we'll laugh about this tomorrow," and I silenced the notifications, sliding under the covers in my old t-shirt, the rain tapping steadily on the window, the everyday sounds of my quiet life feeling suddenly hollow, yet charged with the raw truth that spilled out tonight, the immediate fallout leaving me alone with the ache, but also strangely awake to the possibility that protecting myself might mean finally speaking the words I had swallowed for decades. And as sleep refused to come, the images replayed in my mind. Claire's laugh, Mom's complicit smile, Dad's oblivious roar, the wine's cold shock. But beneath the hurt, a small, quiet voice whispered that this confrontation, this humiliating soak through my uniform, might be the beginning of no longer pretending everything was fine, the beginning of feeling the full weight of the pain so I could one day set it down. The apartment felt colder than usual when I finally turned off the hallway light and stood in the dark living room still wearing the damp t-shirt that now carried the faint, sour edge of spilled wine and hospital sweat. My bare feet pressing against the hardwood that had always felt grounding, but tonight registered only as chill. I didn't bother turning on the overhead, just flicked the small lamp beside the couch, its weak yellow pool barely reaching the corners where shadows clung like the thoughts I couldn't shake. The first full night of truth stretching ahead, empty and endless, after I'd left their house without another word, without waiting for the apologies I knew would come too late and too lightly. I dropped onto the couch cushions, still holding the shape of last week's Netflix binge with my neighbor Sarah, when life had felt ordinary and safe. Now the remote lay untouched on the coffee table next to the half-empty mug of chamomile I'd made at 10 and forgotten, the steam long gone, the tea cold and filmy on top. I kept replaying the moment Claire's arm had swept wide, her laugh already building before the glass even tilted, as if she'd planned the splash the way she used to plan elaborate pranks when we were kids. Except those ended with hugs and shared secrets. This one ended with me standing soaked and silent while my parents laughed, the sound echoing in my skull louder than the rain that still tapped insistently against the windowpane. I pulled my knees to my chest, the fabric of the old college sweatshirt bunching around my shins, and let the tears come again. Slower this time, less frantic, more like a steady leak I couldn't plug. The confession I'd never spoken aloud, finally surfacing in the quiet of my own space, that I had spent 32 years being the easy one, the one who didn't make waves, who covered for Claire's absences, who listened to Mom's worries about Dad's blood pressure, who drove across town for every school event, even after moving out, because someone had to show up, and apparently that someone was always me, while Claire got to arrive late in heels with stories that made everyone lean in. I hated how small that realization made me feel, how the anger at them tangled with the deeper grief of wondering why I had let it go on so long, why I had smiled through the sidelong comments about my sensible shoes, my practical haircut, my lack of drama, as if steadiness were a flaw instead of a choice. I reached for my phone on the cushion beside me, the screen lighting up with notifications I hadn't looked at since the car. Mom's 3 texts, the last one reading, "We're worried, honey, please let us know you got home safe." Claire's single message from an hour ago, "Dramatic much? Call me when you're over it." And one from Dad, simply, "Drive careful, kiddo." The casualness of it all, twisting the knife deeper. I typed nothing back, just set the phone face down on the table, the soft clunk loud in the stillness, then stood and walked to the bedroom, peeling off the t-shirt, the skin underneath goose-pimpled and raw. I pulled on flannel pajama pants and an old hoodie that still smelled faintly of laundry detergent from last month's wash day routine, the small domestic anchor that usually comforted me, tonight feeling almost mocking, because what good were clean sheets and folded towels when the people who were supposed to see me had chosen laughter instead? I crawled under the duvet, the weight of it pressing me into the mattress, but sleep stayed stubbornly distant. So I lay there, staring at the ceiling fan's slow, lazy circles, the blades cutting shadows across the pale paint, memories drifting in uninvited. The Christmas 2 years ago, when Claire announced her promotion and Mom cried happy tears, while I sat quietly proud of my new certification nobody asked about then. Then the way Dad always saved the last slice of pie for Claire because she visited less often, as if scarcity made her more deserving, and the slow accumulation of those moments now felt like evidence in a case I had never wanted to bring. I thought about calling Sarah, or even my coworker Mia, who always listened without judgment, but the clock read past midnight, and the idea of explaining it all, of admitting out loud how deeply it hurt, felt exhausting beyond words. So I stayed alone with the ache, letting it settle into my bones the way a bruise deepens overnight. The confession tonight hadn't been loud or theatrical, just me finally walking out instead of staying to mop up their mess, and in the silence that followed, I felt the first faint shift. Not relief, exactly, but a loosening, a recognition that the tears soaking my pillow were not weakness, but proof I still cared enough to feel the betrayal fully, instead of numbing it with the old familiar excuses. Tomorrow I would have to face work, the 6 a.m. alarm, the charting, the patients who needed me steady and present. But tonight belonged to this raw unraveling, the first full night where I allowed myself to name the hurt without immediately forgiving it away. I turned onto my side, curling around the extra pillow I usually shoved to the edge of the bed, the rain outside softening to a drizzle, the sound almost lulling now. And as my breathing slowed, I whispered into the dark, "Just once, I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to want more than this. The words hanging fragile in the air, like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep yet, but one I refused to take back. The lamp still burning low across the room because turning it off felt too final, too much like surrendering to the dark, and I let it stay on, its small, steady glow a quiet companion through the long hours until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The pain still there, but no longer screaming, just a dull, persistent throb that whispered of changes still to come, changes I could no longer pretend weren't necessary. Morning arrived gray and reluctant, the way March mornings sometimes do in the suburbs, where the sky seems to press down on the rooftops and the coffee maker's gurgle sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. I stood at the counter in yesterday's hoodie, the sleeves pushed up to my elbows, staring at the dark liquid swirling in the pot while my phone vibrated again on the granite, the screen lighting up with Mom's name for the fourth time since 6 a.m. I let it go to voicemail, the same way I'd ignored Claire's call at 5:47 and Dad's text at 6:12 asking if I was okay, because okay felt like a word belonging to someone else now, someone who hadn't stood in her parents' dining room dripping wine while the people who raised her laughed at her expense. I poured the coffee, black, no milk, no sugar, the bitterness matching the ache still lodged under my ribs, and carried the mug to the small breakfast table, where sunlight struggled through the half-open blinds, striping the wood in thin, reluctant bars. I sat and sipped slowly, letting the heat scald my tongue just enough to feel something physical, instead of the deeper burn of realizing that protecting the others, the fragile balance of our family, was no longer something I could keep doing at the cost of myself, because there was a child in this equation, not mine, but the one who looked up to me the most, my 14-year-old niece, Lily, Claire's daughter, who still texted me good morning memes every weekday and asked for help with algebra even though her mom had tutors on speed dial. Lily, who last summer had spent 2 weeks at my apartment learning how to make pancakes from scratch because Claire was in Paris for work and Dad's knees weren't great for standing long at the stove, and Mom had been too busy organizing the church bazaar to notice the quiet loneliness in her granddaughter's eyes. I couldn't let last night's humiliation bleed into Lily's world, couldn't let her walk into another family gathering wondering why Aunt Mara looked tense or why the adults spoke in clipped tones. So I opened my messages, finally, the cursor blinking patiently while I typed the first boundary I'd ever set without apology. I'm taking some space this week. Please don't come by or call unless it's an emergency. I need time to process what happened at dinner last night. It wasn't funny to me, and I'm not ready to pretend it was. The send button felt heavier than it should, but once the message whooshed away, a small breath escaped me. Not relief exactly, but the first exhale after holding air too long. I sent the same text to the family group chat. No emojis, no softening phrases, just the plain truth, then muted the thread before the replies could flood in. I knew Mom would call, Claire would send a voice note laced with defensiveness, Dad would text something short and gruff like, understood, but the silence after felt necessary, almost sacred. I showered, the hot water pounding against my shoulders until the skin turned pink, then dressed in clean scrubs, the fresh cotton a small armor against the day ahead. Work would be the same chaos of beeping monitors, hurried handoffs, and patients who thanked me with tired eyes, but today I carried the extra weight of deciding how much of myself to give outside those walls. When I got to the hospital, the charge nurse, Mia, caught my expression right away, the way she always did, and pulled me into the break room before rounds started. What happened? You look like you haven't slept in a week. I told her everything. The wine, the laughter, the way my parents had chosen amusement over concern. The words tumbling out quieter than I expected, but steady. Mia listened without interrupting, just nodded once when I finished, then said, "You don't have to forgive that on their timeline. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone is hold the line until they understand it hurts." I nodded, the lump in my throat loosening just enough to swallow coffee instead of tears. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of vitals, IV starts, and one small boy who squeezed my hand when the needle went in, whispering, "You're nice," like always. But the anchor through it all was the thought of Lily. I texted her separately after lunch, just a quick, "Hey kiddo, how's school going?" Nothing about the adults, nothing heavy. She replied almost immediately with a photo of her algebra homework circled in red pen and a crying emoji followed by, "Help me, Aunt Mara, I'm dying." I smiled for the first time since walking out of my parents' house, the small act of being present for her feeling like the only clean thing left in this mess. When I got home that evening, the apartment smelled faintly of yesterday's untouched dinner still in the fridge. I heated leftovers, rice and chicken curry from the Thai place down the street, ate standing at the counter, scrolling through old photos on my phone, stopping on one from last Thanksgiving. Lily and I in matching paper crowns, laughing while Claire posed artfully in the background, Mom beaming at her older daughter, Dad carving turkey with the same focused expression he used to use when teaching me to ride a bike. The memory stung, but it also clarified something. I didn't want to lose the good pieces, the quiet evenings reading to Lily when she was smaller, the way she still hugged me longer than anyone else, so I would protect those pieces even if it meant drawing lines around the parts that hurt. The first painful talk came that night when Claire finally called after I'd ignored 3 more texts, her voice tight with the kind of irritation she saved when things didn't go her way. "Seriously, Mara? What's with the dramatic text? I spilled wine. It was an accident. Why are you acting like I attacked you?" I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, the phone pressed to my ear, and for once didn't rush to smooth it over. I said it wasn't just the wine, it was everyone laughing while I stood there soaked and humiliated, you included, Mom and Dad too, and I'm tired of being the one who absorbs it so everyone else can stay comfortable. Silence stretched long enough that I heard her exhale sharply, then, "Fine, if you want to make it a thing, go ahead, but don't drag Lily into your mood." "I won't. She's the only reason I'm even answering right now." I hung up before she could respond, the click of the call ending loud in the quiet room, my heart hammering but my hands steady for the first time in days. I opened my laptop, searched for local therapists the way I'd thought about doing for months, but always postponed because who has time between shifts and family obligations? Tonight, though, the cursor hovered over the submit button on the intake form, and I filled it out. Name, age, reason for seeking therapy, family conflict, long-standing patterns of dismissal, emotional invalidation. The words looked stark on the screen, but honest, and when I hit send, confirmation popped up almost immediately. Appointment available next Tuesday. I closed the laptop, leaned back against the cushions, and listened to the refrigerator hum, the everyday sound wrapping around me like a reminder that life kept moving even when everything inside felt rearranged. The boundaries I'd set today weren't walls. They were fences with gates I could still open when the time was right. But for now, they held the hurt at bay long enough for me to breathe, to think, to protect the one relationship in this tangled family that still felt pure. Lily's goodnight text came at 9:30, a sleepy emoji, and "Love you, Aunt Mara." I typed back, "Love you more, kiddo, sleep well," knowing that tomorrow I would keep showing up for her, keep drawing the lines, keep feeling the pain without letting it swallow me whole, because protecting the others didn't mean erasing myself anymore. And in that small, hard-won shift, the first threads of something stronger began to weave themselves into the frayed fabric of who we'd always been. Saturday morning broke with a thin, pale light filtering through the bedroom blinds, the kind of February sun that promises nothing but still insists on showing up. I woke before the alarm, the sheets tangled around my legs from another night of shallow, restless sleep, the kind where dreams bleed into half-remembered memories of Claire's laugh echoing down the hallway of our childhood house, and my own voice trying to speak, but coming out muffled by water or fabric or shame. I lay there for long minutes, staring at the ceiling crack that had appeared last summer after a heavy rain, letting the quiet settle until the ache in my chest felt less like a fresh wound and more like an old scar that still pulls when the weather changes. I had decided on Thursday night, after the last boundary text went unanswered, that I needed physical distance. Not just the muted notifications, but actual miles. So I booked this small Airbnb an hour north, a one-bedroom cabin on the edge of a state park. I'd driven past 100 times on the way to visit patients in the rural clinics. The kind of place with knotty pine walls, a wood-burning stove, and no cell service in the back bedroom. Perfect for disappearing without disappearing completely. I packed light. Jeans, a couple of sweaters, the soft gray scarf Lily gave me for my birthday last year, the one she'd knitted herself with uneven stitches and too much enthusiasm. Then I stopped by Sarah's apartment on the way out. She answered the door in yoga pants, her hair in a messy bun, coffee mug in hand, the smell of fresh ground beans drifting into the hallway. "Come in," she said before I could explain anything. "Just come in." So I did. Sat at her tiny kitchen table while she poured me a mug and listened as I told her about the dinner, the wine, the laughter, the way my parents' amusement had landed like a slap I hadn't seen coming. Sarah didn't rush to fix it. She just nodded, sipped her coffee, and said, "You've been carrying them all for so long. It's no wonder the weight finally shifted. Have you told them what you need yet?" I shook my head. "Not really, just that I need space." She reached across the table, squeezed my forearm once, firmly, then let go. Good start. Sometimes space is the only language they understand at first. I left her place lighter, not resolved, but unburdened enough to get in the car and drive. The highway narrowed as I left the suburbs, the strip malls giving way to bare trees and frost-kissed fields, the radio playing low, an old playlist I hadn't touched in months, songs from college days when Claire and I still shared secrets instead of silences. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had clouded over, promising the rain the forecast had teased all week. I carried my bag inside, the air inside cool and pine-scented, turned on the heat, let it rumble to life while I unpacked the few groceries I'd stopped for. Bread, cheese, apples, a bottle of red. I almost laughed at the irony, but didn't open it. Instead, brewed tea in the tiny kitchen kettle, the steam rising in soft curls as I stood at the window, watching droplets gather on the glass. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, which felt deliberate, almost merciful. No temptation to check if Claire had texted an apology, or if Mom had sent another "we miss you" photo of the empty dining table. I sat on the worn plaid couch, pulled a throw over my lap, and opened the notebook I'd brought, the one I used for shift notes and grocery lists, but today, for something else. I wrote the rules. The transparency I would need if I ever let them back in. No more ambushes, no more casual cruelty dressed as humor. I will not stay in a room where I'm the punchline. I will not pretend the hurt didn't happen to keep the peace. I will speak my truth, even if my voice shakes. I will expect listening, not deflection. The list grew longer than I expected. Each item a small stake in the ground, marking where I stood now versus where I'd stood for years. When the rain started in earnest, drumming hard against the metal roof, I moved to the window seat, watched the drops race each other down the pane. The world outside blurred, soft and gray, like the edges of my anger had blurred into something quieter, more manageable. I thought about calling Lily. She'd texted yesterday asking if I was mad at her mom. I'd answered honestly, "Not at you, kiddo, just working through some grown-up stuff with your mom and grandpa. She sent back a string of heart emojis and a promise to send me her next math test score so I could see how much better she was getting without tutors hovering. I smiled at the memory, then felt the familiar pang because protecting her meant protecting myself too, meant not letting the family pattern repeat in her generation the way it had in mine. That night, I cooked simple pasta on the 2-burner stove, the sauce from a jar, but the act of chopping garlic, standing at the counter with the rain outside, felt grounding, almost meditative. I ate at the small table, facing the window, the cabin's single lamp casting a warm circle around me. No phone, no television, just the sound of water on the roof and the occasional pop of the logs I'd fed into the stove. After dinner, I sat by the fire, the notebook open again, added one more rule. I will forgive on my timeline, not theirs. Not because it's convenient or because holidays are coming, but because I've healed enough to mean it. The words looked solid on the page, less like wishes, more like decisions. And when I finally crawled into the narrow bed, the flannel sheets cool against my skin, I didn't fight the memories that came. Instead, I let them pass like clouds. The dinner, the wine, the laughter, but also the earlier years. Claire teaching me to braid my hair, Mom reading us stories in funny voices, Dad carrying me on his shoulders through the county fair when my legs got tired. Those moments existed too. They weren't erased by the hurt, they just needed to be held in balance with it. Sunday morning, the rain had eased to a drizzle. I walked the trail behind the cabin, boots crunching on wet leaves, the air sharp with pine and earth, my breath visible in small puffs. I didn't think about solutions or confrontations, just moved one foot in front of the other, letting the rhythm steady me. When I got back to the cabin, damp and flushed, I made coffee, sat on the porch steps, wrapped in the throw, and stared at the mist hanging low over the trees. The rules felt less like a list now, more like bones, new scaffolding for whatever came next. I drove home that afternoon, the highway busier with Sunday traffic, people heading back to routines I wasn't quite ready to re-enter. But the cabin had done its work, given me space to decide the rules, to write them down, to feel them settle into place. When I pulled into my parking spot, the apartment building looked the same, gray brick, windows glowing here and there, but I felt different. Not fixed, not whole, just clearer about what I would and would not accept anymore. I unpacked slowly, hung the damp coat in the bathroom to dry, placed the notebook on the nightstand where I'd see it every morning, a quiet reminder that the transparency I needed wasn't punishment, it was clarity. And as I heated soup for dinner, the steam rising in familiar curls, I let myself imagine the next conversation, not with dread, but with the small, steady knowledge that I had rules now, boundaries I'd drawn in solitude and rain, and I would carry them back into the family like a lantern, not to burn, but to light the way towards something more honest, even if the path was still muddy and long. Tuesday evening arrived with the same soft gray light that had followed me home from the cabin the week before, the kind of dusk that makes streetlights flicker on one by one along the suburban roads I drive every day to and from the hospital. I sat in the parking lot of the low brick building that housed Dr. Elena Ramirez's practice, the sign reading Family and Individual Counseling in simple white letters on navy, the engine idling while I gripped the steering wheel a little too hard, telling myself it was just an appointment, not a surrender, not a failure, just the next small necessary step. I had filled out the online paperwork, already answered the intake questions about sleep patterns, family history, current stressors, with careful, neutral phrases that still felt exposing when I read them back. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser on the side table, and the receptionist smiled without asking questions, handed me a clipboard with one last form, then buzzed me through the door. When Dr. Ramirez appeared in the hallway, she was shorter than I'd pictured, mid-50s, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, wearing soft gray slacks and a cream sweater. The kind of calm presence that made the knot in my stomach loosen half a notch. Without a word, she led me to the small office, bookshelves lining one wall, a low couch opposite 2 armchairs, a box of tissues discreetly placed on the side table. She gestured to the couch. I sat on the edge at first, then let my back settle against the cushions. When she took the armchair across from me, legs crossed at the ankle, notepad balanced on her knee, she asked what brought me here today. And the question hung simple and open enough that the words came without rehearsing. The dinner, the wine, the laughter, how my parents had joined in, how Claire had orchestrated it all, how I'd walked out dripping and humiliated, how the hurt had cracked something open that I couldn't close again by pretending everything was fine. She listened, head tilted slightly, eyes steady, never interrupting, just nodding once when I paused to breathe. The silence after I finished felt different from the silences at home, not heavy with expectation, but spacious enough to let the next thought surface. I told her about the rules I'd written in the cabin, about Lily, about the way I'd started muting group chats, about how the anger had quieted into something colder, more deliberate. Grief, she asked, what I hoped to get from therapy, and I surprised myself by answering honestly. I want to stop feeling like I have to earn being seen. I want to learn how to hold boundaries without feeling like I'm betraying everyone else. She wrote something down, then looked up again. That's a good place to start. We spent the rest of the hour mapping the patterns, the role I'd taken on as the reliable one, the peacemaker, the one who absorbed so others didn't have to. When the session ended, she gave me homework. Small vulnerability acts, she called them. Nothing dramatic, just one honest sentence a day, spoken or written to someone in my life. No fixing, no explaining, just stating what I felt or needed. I left the building, the air cooler now, carrying the promise of spring, the parking lot lights buzzing overhead. I drove home slowly, the radio off, windows cracked, letting the damp evening air move through the car. When I got inside, I kicked off my shoes, left my coat draped over the chair instead of hanging it immediately, small rebellions against the old habit of orderliness. I made tea, chamomile again, the kettle clicking off in the quiet, opened my phone and saw the new text from Lily, a photo of her science project poster on plate tectonics with a caption, "Nailed it! Thanks for the diagram help last month." I typed back, "Proud of you, kiddo, you're killing it," then added after a pause, "I'm working on some grown-up stuff, but I'm okay, and I love you." The send felt lighter than expected. No flood of follow-ups, just a heart emoji from her minutes later. I set the phone down, walked to the bedroom, pulled the notebook from the nightstand, and wrote the first vulnerability act of the day. I felt dismissed and invisible at dinner last week, and it still hurts. I didn't send it anywhere, just let the words sit on the page, solid and unapologetic. The next morning at work, I tried another one. During break, Mia asked how I was holding up. I could have said, fine, the automatic answer, but instead I said, I'm angry and sad and trying to figure out what comes next. She didn't flinch, just poured me more coffee from the pot, said, that's honest, thanks for telling me. The small exchange stayed with me through the shift, a quiet warmth amid the usual rush of call lights and medication passes. That evening, Claire texted, not a voice note, not a defensive paragraph, just, hey, can we talk when you're ready? No pressure. I stared at the message for long minutes, the cursor blinking, then typed back, yes, but not yet. I need more time. She replied, okay, take the time you need. I need you to know I'm sorry for the whine and the laughing. It wasn't okay. The words looked strange on my screen, almost fragile. I didn't respond right away, just saved the screenshot, closed the app. The apology wasn't everything, it wasn't even close, but it was the first time she'd named the hurt without immediately qualifying it away. I carried that small shift into the rest of the week, tried one vulnerability act a day, texted Mom, I miss our Saturday coffee, but I'm not ready to sit at the table where it happened yet. She sent back a simple, I understand, sweetheart, whenever you're ready. The reply stung less than I expected, because it didn't demand I hurry up, didn't insist I get over it, just acknowledged the boundary I'd set. Thursday night, I met Sarah for takeout at her place, pad thai and spring rolls spread across her coffee table. She asked about therapy. I told her about the homework, about the small sentences, about how saying them out loud or typing felt like peeling off a bandage slowly instead of ripping it. She listened, then said, you're doing the hardest part, showing up for yourself first. The words landed softly but deeply. I drove home under a sky that had finally cleared, stars sharp against the black, the streetlights painting gold streaks on the wet pavement. When I got inside, I lit the small candle on the kitchen counter, the one I usually saved for power outages or bad days. Tonight, it felt like both, and neither. I sat at the table, opened the notebook again, wrote another line. I'm starting to believe I deserve space without guilt. The ink looked dark and certain against the page. I closed the book, set it aside, then picked up my phone one last time before bed, opened the family chat that had stayed silent since my last message, and typed something new. I've started therapy. Individual for now. I'm working through what happened and what I need going forward. I'm not cutting anyone off, but I need things to change. I won't be at Sunday dinner this week, but I'll let you know when I'm ready for the next one. I hit send before the second guessing could catch up, then turned the phone face down on the counter, walked to the bedroom, changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, the ordinary motions feeling almost sacred tonight, because they belonged to me, the me who was trying small acts of vulnerability, who was daring to be seen not as the easy one, but as someone with needs, someone worth listening to. When I slid under the covers, the sheets cool and familiar, I didn't reach for the extra pillow to hug. Instead, I stretched out, let my arms rest at my sides, open to whatever came next. The tentative contact I'd allowed felt fragile but real, a first thin bridge built not of forgiveness yet, but of possibility. The candle still burning low in the other room, its light slipping under the door, a quiet reminder that change didn't have to be loud to be true. And as sleep finally tugged at me, I let myself imagine not perfection, but progress. Small, honest steps towards a family that might one day look at me and actually see the woman I'd become, while still loving the girl I used to be. The joint session felt like stepping onto a frozen pond in early spring. The ice still solid underfoot, but thin enough in places that every step sent a quiet crack through the room. Dr. Ramirez's office looked the same as my individual ones, the lavender diffuser humming softly, the bookshelves unchanged, yet the air carried a different weight. When Claire walked in 10 minutes after me, her coat still damp from the sudden downpour outside, her hair pulled into a low ponytail, strands escaping the way they always did when she was nervous, she gave me a small, tight smile, not the bright performative one she used at work functions, but something smaller, more uncertain, then took the armchair opposite mine, while Dr. Ramirez sat between us in her usual spot, notepad ready, legs crossed at the ankle. She started by asking each of us to say in one sentence why we were here today. I went first because the silence felt heavier on me than on Claire. I said, I'm here because I need to understand why being laughed at while humiliated felt normal to the people who raised me, and I need it to stop feeling normal. Claire's turn came after a long exhale. She looked at the carpet, then at me, then at Dr. Ramirez. I'm here because I hurt my sister without meaning to, and I want to fix it, but I don't know how without making it worse. The words landed plain and unadorned. No excuses, no, but you're too sensitive tacked on the end. Just the admission hanging there, raw enough that I felt my throat tighten. Dr. Ramirez nodded, thanked us both, then suggested we begin by naming the deeper issues underneath the dinner incident. Not the wine itself, but what it had carried, the years of uneven attention, the way Claire's successes were celebrated with toasts, while mine were acknowledged with polite nods, the way I had learned to shrink my needs so the family could keep orbiting around the louder, brighter one. Claire shifted in her chair, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. I didn't realize how much space I was taking, she said quietly. I thought you were fine with it because you never said anything. I opened my mouth to argue that I had said things in small ways over the years, but Dr. Ramirez lifted a gentle hand. Let's stay with what's true right now. What did Mara try to say that you didn't hear? Claire looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. I heard you say you were tired, I heard you say you wanted more credit, but I told myself it was just work stress, not that I was part of the problem. The confession sounded like it cost her something. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt an unexpected pang. Not pity exactly, but recognition that she too had been carrying a version of this story, one where she was the screw-up who needed constant redemption, while I was the saint who never needed anything. Dr. Ramirez asked me what it felt like to hear that. I swallowed hard. It feels like too little too late, but also like maybe it's the first real thing you've said to me about this. I don't know if I can trust it yet, but I want to. The honesty surprised me. The way it came out, steady, not trembling. Claire nodded slowly, eyes shiny but not spilling over. Dr. Ramirez guided us through the next part, small steps closer, naming what safety looked like in this room right now. No interrupting, no defending, no fixing, just listening, then reflecting back what we heard. I went first, told Claire that when she laughed that night, it felt like confirmation I didn't matter as much as keeping the mood light. She repeated it back slowly. When I laughed that night, it felt to you like confirmation you didn't matter as much as keeping the mood light. Her voice caught on the word confirmation, and she pressed her lips together hard. I nodded once. The echo of my own hurt coming back at me from her mouth somehow made it smaller, less monstrous. She spoke next. When you walked out soaked and shaking, I told myself it was an overreaction, because if it wasn't, then I had to face how cruel I'd been. I repeated her words back the way we'd been instructed. When I walked out, soaked and shaking, you told yourself it was an overreaction because facing how cruel you'd been felt too big. The room went quiet after that. The only sound, the soft tick of the wall clock and the distant murmur of traffic outside. Dr. Ramirez let the silence hold, then asked if we were ready for one small physical gesture of connection, something that felt manageable, not forced. Claire looked at me, question in her eyes. I hesitated, the old reflex to pull away rising fast, then fading as I remembered the rules I'd written in the cabin. I extended my hand, palm up, on the small table between us, not demanding, but offering. She stared at it for several seconds, then slowly placed her hand in mine, fingers cool at first, then warming as we sat there, neither of us gripping too tight, just resting. The contact simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried the weight of every unsaid thing between us since we were kids. I felt her pulse fluttering against my skin, quick and uncertain, matching the thud in my own chest. Dr. Ramirez watched without comment, let us stay in that small bridge of skin until Claire spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Mara, not just for the wine, for all the times I let you carry the quiet parts so I could shine. I didn't realize how much space I was taking, she said quietly. I thought you were fine with it because you never said anything. I opened my mouth to argue that I had said things, in small ways over the years, but Dr. Ramirez lifted a gentle hand. Let's stay with what's true right now. What did Mara try to say that you didn't hear? Claire looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. I heard you say you were tired, I heard you say you wanted more credit, but I told myself it was just work stress, not that I was part of the problem. The confession sounded like it cost her something. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt an unexpected pang. Not pity exactly, but recognition that she too had been carrying a version of this story, one where she was the screw-up who needed constant redemption, while I was the saint who never needed anything. Dr. Ramirez asked me what it felt like to hear that. I swallowed hard. It feels like too little too late, but also like maybe it's the first real thing you've said to me about this. I don't know if I can trust it yet, but I want to. The honesty surprised me. The way it came out, steady, not trembling. Claire nodded slowly, eyes shiny but not spilling over. Dr. Ramirez guided us through the next part, small steps closer, naming what safety looked like in this room right now. No interrupting, no defending, no fixing, just listening, then reflecting back what we heard. I went first, told Claire that when she laughed that night, it felt like confirmation I didn't matter as much as keeping the mood light. She repeated it back slowly. When I laughed that night, it felt to you like confirmation you didn't matter as much as keeping the mood light. Her voice caught on the word confirmation, and she pressed her lips together hard. I nodded once. The echo of my own hurt coming back at me from her mouth somehow made it smaller, less monstrous. She spoke next. When you walked out soaked and shaking, I told myself it was an overreaction, because if it wasn't, then I had to face how cruel I'd been. I repeated her words back the way we'd been instructed. When I walked out, soaked and shaking, you told yourself it was an overreaction because facing how cruel you'd been felt too big. The room went quiet after that. The only sound, the soft tick of the wall clock and the distant murmur of traffic outside. Dr. Ramirez let the silence hold, then asked if we were ready for one small physical gesture of connection, something that felt manageable, not forced. Claire looked at me, question in her eyes. I hesitated, the old reflex to pull away rising fast, then fading as I remembered the rules I'd written in the cabin. I extended my hand, palm up, on the small table between us, not demanding, but offering. She stared at it for several seconds, then slowly placed her hand in mine, fingers cool at first, then warming as we sat there, neither of us gripping too tight, just resting. The contact simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried the weight of every unsaid thing between us since we were kids. I felt her pulse fluttering against my skin, quick and uncertain, matching the thud in my own chest. Dr. Ramirez watched without comment, let us stay in that small bridge of skin until Claire spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Mara, not just for the wine, for all the times I let you carry the quiet parts so I could shine. I didn't realize how much space I was taking, she said quietly. I thought you were fine with it because you never said anything. I opened my mouth to argue that I had said things in small ways over the years, but Dr. Ramirez lifted a gentle hand. Let's stay with what's true right now. What did Mara try to say that you didn't hear? Claire looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. I heard you say you were tired, I heard you say you wanted more credit, but I told myself it was just work stress, not that I was part of the problem. The confession sounded like it cost her something. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt an unexpected pang. Not pity exactly, but recognition that she too had been carrying a version of this story, one where she was the screw-up who needed constant redemption, while I was the saint who never needed anything. Dr. Ramirez asked me what it felt like to hear that. I swallowed hard. It feels like too little too late, but also like maybe it's the first real thing you've said to me about this. I don't know if I can trust it yet, but I want to. The honesty surprised me. The way it came out, steady, not trembling. Claire nodded slowly, eyes. The idea for the family weekend came from Dr. Ramirez in our last joint session the week before. She suggested something low stakes, neutral ground. No dining room table, no wine glasses within reach. Just a place where we could exist together without the old scripts taking over. Claire had looked at me across the small table between our chairs, her expression careful, almost hopeful, and said, There's that cabin rental Mom and Dad used to take us to when we were kids. The one on the lake up near the state forest. It's still there. I checked last month. Maybe we could go. Just the four of us. No kids, no distractions. I felt the familiar pull to say no, the reflex to protect the fragile new space I'd carved out, but underneath it was something else. Curiosity. A quiet wondering what it might feel like to share air with them, without armor, without the need to prove anything. So I said yes, but with conditions. No forced activities, no pretending the past month hadn't happened, separate bedrooms, and we talk when someone needs to talk, not when it's convenient. Everyone agreed quickly, too quickly, almost as if they'd been waiting for me to set the terms, which in itself felt like a small shift. We drove up on a Friday after work, Claire in the passenger seat of my car because she'd sold hers last year to save for a down payment, Mom and Dad following in their SUV, the 2-hour drive mostly quiet, except for the low hum of the radio Claire had tuned to an oldies station, songs from the 90s that used to play on family road trips when we still fought over who got the middle seat. I kept my eyes on the highway, the late afternoon sun slanting gold across the dashboard. Claire broke the silence first, about halfway there. I'm nervous, she said, voice small. I keep thinking I'll say the wrong thing again. I glanced at her, saw the way her fingers twisted the strap of her purse, the same nervous habit she'd had since grade school. I said, "Me too. But we don't have to fill every silence. It's okay if it's awkward." She nodded, swallowed hard, then reached over and turned the volume down just a little so the music became background instead of barrier. When we arrived, the cabin smelled of cedar and last season's wood smoke, the lake flat and silver under a sky turning bruise purple. Mom immediately busied herself unpacking groceries, the way she always did when emotions felt too big to name. Dad carried bags to the bedrooms, assigned them without asking which one I wanted, the smaller one at the back with the view of the pines. I didn't argue, just thanked him quietly and closed the door behind me. Sat on the edge of the quilted bed for a long minute, letting the quiet settle. The first evening passed in careful orbits. We cooked together, simple grilled chicken, corn on the cob, salad. No one mentioned the wine incident, but no one pretended it hadn't happened either. Claire chopped vegetables beside me, shoulder to shoulder, the knife sounds steady, rhythmic. I passed her the cutting board when she needed more space. Our elbows brushed once. She didn't pull away, I didn't either. After dinner, we sat on the wide porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, the lake lapping softly at the gawk. Mom brought out hot chocolate, not the powdered kind, but the real stuff she'd melted on the stove with cinnamon sticks. The mugs warmed our hands, the steam rising in soft curls under the string lights Dad had hung earlier. Claire spoke first, her voice carrying just enough to reach everyone. "I've been thinking a lot about how I always assumed Mara was okay because she never yelled, never made a scene. But that wasn't fair. It was lazy." Mom set her mug down carefully, said, "I know." I laughed because I didn't want the evening to turn sour. I thought if I joined in, it would stay light. But light at whose cost? Dad cleared his throat, looked at the dark water, said, "I should have seen you standing there, soaked, and done something. Anything besides laugh. I'm sorry, kiddo." The apologies came one after the other. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just plain and present. I listened, felt the words land in different places, some soothing the raw spots, some still stinging because words alone couldn't erase years of being the background. But they were starting something. I said thank you, then added, "I'm still angry sometimes, and hurt. But I'm here because I want us to be different. Not the same family with new rules, but a family that actually listens when someone says it hurts." The night deepened, the conversation ebbed and flowed. We talked about childhood memories, the time Claire and I built a fort in the backyard and Mom let us eat dinner inside it, the summer Dad taught us both to fish, even though I caught more than he did. We laughed, small, careful laughs that didn't mock anyone. The next morning, we walked the trail around the lake, the path muddy from overnight rain, boots squelching. Claire fell into step beside me, our paces matching without effort. She said, "I miss this. Us, before everything got complicated." "I miss it too," I said, and meant it. We stopped at a lookout point, the lake spreading below us, mist still clinging to the water. Claire reached for my hand the way she had in therapy, but this time, no audience, no therapist guiding, just her fingers threading through mine, cold at first, then warming. I didn't pull away. We stood like that for long minutes, the wind moving through the pines, carrying the scent of wet earth and evergreen. Later that afternoon, it rained again, hard, sudden, the kind of downpour that drums on the roof and makes the world feel smaller, safer inside. We played cards, an old deck Mom had packed, hearts and spades. Dad kept score the way he always did, but this time, when Claire tried to cheat by hiding an ace, he called her on it gently, no anger, just fact. She laughed, real laughter, not defensive, and slid the card back into the pile. Mom watched us over the top of her reading glasses, eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen in years. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Claire knocked softly on my doorframe. "Can I come in?" I nodded, moved over on the narrow bed. She sat at the foot, pulling her knees up. We talked in the dark. About the deeper things, the jealousy she'd felt when I got straight A's without seeming to try, the resentment I carried when her every milestone got fireworks while mine got polite claps. We didn't solve it all, but we named it all. The honesty felt exhausting and necessary, like lancing something that had been festering too long. When words finally ran out, she leaned over, hugged me tight, the embrace familiar yet new, scented with wood smoke and the lavender lotion she always used. I hugged back, let myself lean into it for once, not bracing for the next hurt. The rain eased sometime after midnight, the cabin quiet except for the drip from the eaves and the occasional creak of settling wood. I walked her to the door, watched her disappear down the short hallway, then returned to bed, the quilt pulled high. The forgiveness wasn't complete yet, but it was emerging, hard-earned and quiet, like the first green shoots after a long winter, not showy, just persistent. The weekend tested us in small ways, a spilled coffee, a too loud laugh that made me flinch, a moment when Dad tried to change the subject and I called it deflection, gently but firmly. Each time we paused, recalibrated, chose to stay in the room instead of retreating. The leaving on Sunday felt different. No slammed doors, no unresolved tension, just goodbyes that included real hugs. Claire whispered in my ear, "Thank you for giving this a chance." I whispered back, "Thank you for showing up." The drive home was quiet again, but the silence felt companionable. Claire dozed in the passenger seat, head against the window. I kept the radio low, let the highway miles roll under the tires. When I pulled into her parking spot, turned off the engine, sat for a minute, feeling the weekend settle into my bones. Not perfect, not healed, but reconnected in a way that felt real. Scarred, yes, but stronger for the scars, because we had chosen to meet in the middle, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. And as I carried my bag upstairs, the everyday sounds of the building, hallway footsteps, distant television, laughter from another apartment, felt less lonely tonight, carrying instead the faint echo of lake water, porch conversations, hands held without prompting, a quiet hope that had grown roots over 2 rainy days in a cedar cabin where a family finally started learning how to listen. A year later, the calendar on my kitchen wall still shows the same faded photo of the lake cabin from that rainy February weekend, the one where we finally started talking instead of performing, and I've kept it there, not out of sentiment exactly, but as a quiet marker of how far the distance between then and now actually is. March again. The air outside carrying that particular damp promise of spring, the kind that makes the sidewalk steam after a morning shower. I stand at the counter, pouring coffee into the same blue mug I used the night I first walked out of my parents' house, the ceramic warm against my palms, the steam rising in familiar lazy spirals while the radio plays low, something acoustic and unhurried. The apartment looks different now. Not renovated, just lived in with intention. A small bookshelf where the blank wall used to be, holding novels I've actually finished. Therapy workbooks with tabs marking pages I still revisit occasionally. A framed photo of Lily at her 8th grade graduation, cap slightly crooked, smile wide enough to show the braces she hated but wore proudly. Claire and I stand on either side of her in the picture, arms around each other's waists, the 3 of us laughing at something the photographer said. The frame sits on the windowsill where sunlight hits it most mornings, a small daily reminder that family isn't just the people who raised you, but the ones you choose to keep choosing. Today is Sunday, not the old obligatory dinner Sunday, but one we've rebuilt on different terms. Once a month now, at my place or Claire's, or sometimes still at Mom and Dad's, but never without checking first. Never without the understanding that anyone can say, I need to leave early, or I'm not up for this tonight, and it will be respected. No questions, no guilt trips. The doorbell rings at 6 sharp, Claire's knock pattern. 2 quick, 1 slow. I open the door to find her holding a bakery box, the smell of fresh sourdough and garlic already drifting in. She smiles, the real one, not the bright one she used to flash for photos, just a soft lift at the corners. Hey, she says, stepping inside, kicking off her boots by the mat the way I've asked her to since she tracked mud across my rug last fall. Hey, I say, taking the box, setting it on the counter. Our movement's easy, familiar in a way that still surprises me sometimes. Mom and Dad arrive minutes later, Dad carrying the lasagna dish, Mom with a bottle of sparkling water because she knows I've cut back on wine since that night. The 4 of us settle around my small dining table, the one I bought secondhand last spring because the old one felt too much like theirs. Plates passed, napkins unfolded, the conversation starts light. Lily's upcoming high school musical. She's playing a lead this time. Claire's new project at work. The promotion she turned down because it would have meant more travel, and she's trying to be home more. Dad's physical therapy progress. He's walking without the cane most days now. Mom talks about the community garden she's helping tend, the tomatoes she's coaxing along. Early, I listen, feel the old reflex to shrink, rise, and fall away, because when there's a pause, they look at me, ask how the new charge nurse role is going. Really listen when I answer. No sidetracks, no quick subject changes, just presence. The kind I used to think only existed in other families. After dinner, we clear the table together, no one rushing to leave. Claire dries while I wash, Mom puts away leftovers, Dad wipes counters. The small domestic choreography that used to feel like obligation now registers as care. We move to the living room, settle on the couch and chairs, coffee mugs refilled, the candle I lit earlier flickering on the coffee table, throwing soft gold across faces that look older, softer around the edges. Lily texts the group chat. A selfie from rehearsal, dramatic hair and rollers. We all laugh at the same time, the sound filling the room without anyone trying to make it happen. Claire catches my eye across the space, mouths, thank you. I nod once, the gesture small but loaded, because we both know what it cost to get here. The individual sessions, the joint ones, the hard conversations where voices rose and tears fell, the months of tentative texts, the cabin weekend that could have gone either way, the slow rebuilding of trust, brick by quiet brick. No one pretends the scars aren't there. I still feel a flicker of caution sometimes when Claire's laugh gets too loud, or when Mom reaches to pat my hand the way she used to when dismissing my concerns. But the flicker passes faster now, replaced by the knowledge that I can name it, say it out loud, walk away if I need to, and they'll respect the boundary because they've learned what happens when they don't. Claire speaks into the quiet room. I've been thinking about last year, the dinner, the wine, the way we all laughed, and how close we came to losing this. She looks at each of us in turn. I'm still sorry, every day. I try to make sure it never happens again. Mom nods, eyes shiny. Dad clears his throat, says, we all carry some of that sorry, kiddo. We're just glad you gave us the chance to do better. I let the words settle, feel them land without the old defensiveness rising to meet them. Then I say, I'm glad too. Not because everything's fixed, because it isn't. There are still days I question whether forgiveness was the right choice, whether closeness is worth the risk. But most days now, the answer feels yes, quieter, stronger than it used to. The evening winds down naturally. Claire leaves first, hugging me long enough that I feel her heartbeat steady against mine. Mom and Dad follow, kisses on cheeks, promises to text when they get home. The door closes behind them, the apartment quiets again, the candles still burning low, the scent of cedar and vanilla lingering. I stand in the middle of the living room for a long minute, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the everyday sounds that once felt lonely now feel like company. I walk to the window, look out at the parking lot, streetlights glowing soft on wet asphalt, think about the girl who drove home a year ago, soaked in wine and betrayal, tears blurring the road ahead. She's still here in some ways. The hurt didn't vanish, it just changed shape, became something I could carry without it carrying me. I blow out the candle, the room dimming to the glow of the lamp, walk to the bedroom, pull the quilt up, sit against the headboard, open the notebook that used to mold rules and vulnerability acts, now mostly blank pages, with occasional notes, dates, small observations. The last entry from 2 months ago simply held, "Hands with Claire at the lake again. No audience, just us." It felt like coming home. I close the book, set it on the nightstand, turn off the lamp, slide under the covers. The darkness familiar, not frightening. The quiet holds no echoes of old laughter, only the soft, steady rhythm of my own breathing. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Not the full mending, not the easy evenings, but something better. A scarred closeness, hard-earned and honest, the kind that doesn't require perfection, only persistence, only the willingness to keep showing up, even when it hurts, even when trust feels thin. The relationship isn't what it was, it's stronger in the broken places, patched with listening, with boundaries, with apologies that don't demand absolution, just acceptance. As sleep pulls me under, I let myself feel the small, steady hope that has grown roots over months. The hope that tomorrow will bring another ordinary Sunday, another chance to choose each other, not out of habit, but out of something deeper, something real. And as the city quiets outside my window, I drift off, not to dreams of perfect reconciliation, but to the simple, realistic comfort of a family that finally learned how to see each other clearly enough to say, "I'm here," and mean it, enough to stay.